Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning as we take you through some of the work we've done. It's been an amazing week. It's always such a great gathering, hearing about the interesting work that different journalists are doing. So we're really glad that you have decided to join us this morning at our session, Shifting Journalism Narratives, how journalism is changing the African storytelling narrative in 4 countries. My name is Vivian Ihekwazu. I'm the Managing Director of Nigeria Health Watch, a health communication advocacy organization based in Abuja. I'm here also with Chibike Alaboso at the very end, who's from Nigeria Health Watch too. He's a program manager and the lead for the Solutions Journalism Africa initiative in Nigeria. We also have with us today our partners from Science Africa, Sharon Ochiano, and online news editor, and Daniel Otungi, the deputy executive director, also at Science Africa. So today, together with Nigeria Health Watch and Science Africa, we're implementing partners of the Solutions Journalism Network. We work across 4 different countries. This is work that we've been doing for almost the past 3 years. Many of you may have heard about solutions journalism. I think we've had a few sessions this week. But just to give you a quick understanding of what it is, solutions journalism really looks to present news in a way that doesn't leave people helpless. Basically, it explains and gives people solutions, people, communities, businesses, solutions to problems. So this is a way of kind of spreading problems, sharing problems solving in a different way, using the news as a critical tool to do that. And really, just to quickly take you through, there are 4 key pillars that a solution story focuses on. So you've got the response. So, how are people responding to problems? Then you provide the evidence and look at its effectiveness. And then insights that can also support others in understanding how those problems are being solved. But of course, we also, in a solutions story, you present the limitations, because we know that, of course, no solution is perfect. So, this is an approach we've been taking, and my partners will take you through some of the work we've done. And why would we take this kind of approach in news reporting? Many of you will understand, the changing landscape, of course, that we're all facing in news, from media proliferation. We have more platforms that people can access news from. Polarization is something that many of us always talk about. Now, in our countries too, it's a similar story, how the news is increasingly become polarized, and what that leads to is a destruction in trust. So, by using this means to present news, it's a way, to kind of build trust back. We know that, for instance, if we look at trust, findings from the 2022 Reuters Institute Digital Network found that when they interviewed 90,000 people, they found that 38% of respondents were avoiding news. So this is really, for us, a way that we are spreading an alternative way of reporting news. Solutions journalism really is a way also to rebalance the narrative, sharing responses to challenges people are facing and empowering people with knowledge. So between the 2 of us, Nigeria Health Watch and Science Africa, we're implementing the Science Journalism Africa initiative. And how are we doing this? We're training journalists in the practice of solutions journalism. Between both organizations, we've trained a total of 60 news organizations across 4 different countries in solutions-oriented reporting. In addition, we've had fellowships where we also, not just newsrooms, we're training freelance journalists who also, between them, embrace a solutions-oriented approach in news reporting. So, we haven't got much time today, so the focus really for today, as the subject of our panel is looking at the 4 countries that we've been implementing the Solutions Journalism Africa initiative, and really take you through examples of how we have done that, how we're using that to build trust in newsrooms, empowering people in communities to really understand that there are alternative ways of seeing problem solving, not just looking at it from a helpless situation. It's not, as we said, always perfect, but we're really pleased in how we've been able to institute this in the newsrooms, that we've had the privilege, really, because it is a privilege, in being able to work with them. As much as we're training them, we also learn from them. So it's really been a two-way process, and over the past 3 years when we've been implementing this, it's really been a real lesson learned for us, and also for the journalists and freelancers that we train. So we'll take you through the examples and really share with you what we've learned. So we'll quickly have two presentations, one from Science Africa, and then Nigeria Health Watch, TPK will take you through that, and Sharon will take you through the Science Africa example. And then we'll have a very quick moderated sort of question and answer session. And we want to open it up to you to also ask questions, and let's use this as an opportunity to share, to continue to share learnings and how we are doing the work, and also get your point of view also in things that you understand in the way we're doing our work. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Sharon, who will take you through examples that they've been, the work they've been doing, at Science Africa. Over to you, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay. So, like Vivian said, my name is Sharon Atinu. I'm an editor at Science Africa. Science Africa is a science media outlet based in Nairobi, Kenya. And we've been entrenching solutions in 3 countries where we work with Solutions Journalism Network to train journalists in Kenya, Rwanda, and Uganda. So far, what we've seen from our training is that solutions journalism is shifting the narrative in the way journalists are telling their stories. More and more journalists are moving from a point of just focusing on the problem to focusing on solutions that are being implemented on the ground. There is a revolution that is going on in newsrooms. It's no longer about we need help here, we need help there, we need help everywhere. It's about there is someone doing this to solve this challenge that is happening here and there. Like recently, we did a fellowship where we gave out grants for journalists to do stories on antimicrobial resistance, and we were amazed at the kind of pitches we got, because we realized though antimicrobial resistance is a global issue, more and more people are working towards eradicating the problem, and these are stories that never came out that could have never come out to the light if we did give such grants on solution stories. So we are seeing a shift even in the way journalists themselves are helping each other in the newsroom. We are seeing a space whereby journalists who have been trained on solution journalism are also training other journalists who have not taken part in the solutions journalism training, and more stories are coming up, even from the journalists who have not been trained, as a result of the ambassadors that we have within the newsroom, in what we refer to as peer-to-peer learning. Additionally, even we are seeing that editors are embracing Sojo. And if editors are embracing Sojo, it means they're giving a platform for journalists to air out Sojo stories. It's no longer about editors dismissing Sojo stories as purely PR stories. Because in the beginning, when we started Sojo, editors were like, these are just public relations stories. But now more and more journalists are seeing, more and more editors are seeing that it's not just PR, because they are not just saying, oh, everything is flowery and rosy. They are also saying that, yes, this response is happening, but there are limitations to this response. So it's not purely PR the way they thought it was. So we are seeing with editors embracing Sojo, more and more journalists are taking up solutions journalism as their beat. Additionally, we are seeing that Sojo is also enhancing trust between journalists and sources, including policymakers. In Africa, for someone to get information, especially from policymakers, you have to write like millions of letters. You don't know who you are even writing the letter to. You go to a director, you want certain information, they're telling you, oh no, I'm not the one to handle that information. So you have to like draft letters upon letters to reach the person that you're targeting. And it's just a comment. It's not even like a whole speech, it's just a comment, like a 1-minute comment. But you have to go through a lot of bureaucratic processes. But with with solutions journalism, policymakers are becoming receptive, researchers are becoming receptive, and they now want to even share the information because they are seeing that journalists are not their enemies. We're just trying to get the information out there. So trust is increasing between sources of news and even journalists. So more and more stories are becoming more credible because we are getting the kind of voices that we need in telling our stories. So in deepening the impact, as Science Africa, we saw it fit to focus not only on the mainstream media houses, but we also incorporated the community media stations, because in Africa there are several languages. People speak, like for example, I'm from Kenya. In Kenya, we have like 44 languages. So it will be so unfair to just bring out news in English and Kiswahili, which are the official languages in Kenya. In a country like Rwanda, Rwanda has like 3 languages, but then they speak also French. So it will be very unfair to miss out on the audience because we are only taking French-speaking journalists. And also in a country like Uganda, they have like about more than 10 language groups. So to reach more audiences and to have more impacts on solutions journalism, in our media trainings, we usually incorporate community-based radio stations, because radio is still king in Africa. Someone may not have TV, but they will listen to radio. Radio is on your phone, you can listen to it anywhere, compared to watching TV or reading a magazine. So that is like what informed the criteria for the kind of newsrooms that we trained in our 3 cohorts. The kind of training format that we used to shift the narrative, we started doing online newsroom training. We started doing newsroom trainings in 2020. This was the period when Corona was in its peak. And that's when we embraced online trainings, where we used Zoom and Google Meet and TeamViewer to train the journalists from different countries. Even when Corona sort of cooled down, we continued with the online training because we realized that online training reaches more people at once than going from one newsroom to another, training individual journalists in their own newsrooms. So for maximum impact, our training format was mainly online, but this was reinforced with physical workshops, which we did in all the 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. Additionally, to entrench solutions and to make it more sustainable, we've also done university trainings. We believe that when we train journalists from where they come from, not just focusing on the newsrooms, if we start getting them at the lower level in the universities, it will be more sustainable for solutions journalism to spread in Africa, because we will have more and more students coming out and joining newsrooms when they are already equipped with the knowledge of solutions journalism. So that is why we resorted to train journalism lecturers, so that as they train the journalists, they are able to incorporate SOJO in their trainings also. As Science Africa, we've partnered with these universities. We've trained these 5 universities, 1 in Rwanda, 1 in Uganda, and about 3 in Kenya. And also to just make it more entrenched, we give an internship project. We give internship to these students from the Kenyan universities. Additionally, we've trained trainers in partnership with Solutions Journalism. These trainers have gone on to become our ambassadors within these 3 countries. That is all for Science Africa. Thank you. So this is an overview of the SOJO training that we've done. We've trained over 30 newsrooms within Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya. Since 2020, we've trained more than 300 journalists in East Africa. We've partnered with 29 journalism institutions in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda. And as such, because these are public institutions whereby a lot of students are applied to these universities, we are able to get more and more student journalists. And then we've produced over 400 stories. Others we can't even count because they are being produced in their own newsrooms. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sharon. That was quite a lot to get through, and you can see, the depth of work that has been done. And I hope you are keeping your questions ready to ask, because she covered a lot about the worksheet that they're doing in 3 different countries. So thank you very much, Sharon, for that. I'll now hand over to Chibike from Nigeria Health Watch, who will now take you through some of the work that we've been doing in Nigeria for the Solutions Journalism Africa Initiative. Over to you, Chibike.
Thank you very much, Vivian. So, like my colleague from Kenya, for us in Nigeria, it's a story of, I don't know if anyone has had that experience where you have an assignment and you say, oh, this is simple, it's just straightforward. And in 3 months, 6 months, it grows multiple heads, like the meat in ancient Greek, Medusa. So that's like our experience. But the good thing there is that growth is organic, and it's as a result of network effect. So we approach these newsrooms, talk to them about solution journalism, and they are now taking ownership to help spread it. So that's really what our experience has been in Nigeria. These people we are working with taking ownership, and it's now gone from a simple idea to a movement of people who are really interested. This is a good example of how it is changing journalists and newsrooms in Nigeria. We work with public media organizations, not just private. I don't know how many of us here know News Agency of Nigeria. They have journalists in all the states in the country. So it's a government agency, but it's really difficult to work with. But we worked with them successfully in this project. And not just working with them, training them and supporting them to do solution journalism. They took ownership of it. The director, sort of the MD who is in charge of the agency across the country, after the engagement finished, they decided to set up a solution journalism desk. For a government agency, for us, that was really a big deal. So they did their stories, we trained them, built their capacities, but they are now taking ownership of it, training their own journalists, having a dedicated desk where they are going to keep on telling these stories of what's working across different sectors. And not just that, they are also training their colleagues across the country, and went further to submit a line item. So when they submitted their budgets for 2023 to the National Assembly, they put a line item there that they wanted to sustain it so the government could give them money. Of course, all of the conversations happen. I think they now put it into another activity. But for us, that was really a big deal, having to work with them successfully, and other government media organizations like the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, which is also a network, like they have representation in all the states, and the Nigerian Television Authority. And it's also redefining how journalists see investigative. This is the editor of one of the newsrooms we've worked with in Nigeria. In the second cohort, this is the International Center for Investigative Reporting. Usually when you talk about investigation, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, they're going to be digging up problems, so who is not doing what's right. But it was interesting to see their editor in this workshop listing all of their strategies for doing their work and saying solution journalism is part of it, because they've been exposing these problems for a long time, and most times they don't really see the results they want. So they're now shifting their strategy to say, okay, this person is not doing it right, but who is doing it right? So they are doing those stories and using it to ask questions. They say, look, this is what your contemporaries are doing, this is what your peers are doing, and you have access to the same resources. Why are you not doing it? So that happened, that shift is happening because of that opportunity to work with them in the Africa Initiative. Again, like our colleagues in Kenya, we also realize it's important to get into the next generation of storytellers. So we're not just working with established journalists. Some of them have been kind enough, humble enough to learn new things, because some of them really have decades of experience in journalism, but they really come down and learn with us, and we also learn with them. But we felt it's also important to get into the next generation of journalists. So we're getting into schools, we are training educators, we are training journalism students. And the interesting thing is, like I said at the beginning, it's also become organic. They are now the ones reaching out to us to say, oh, we have this activity, can you come and train our colleagues on solution journalism? We have activity, maybe a student's week or something. We want to make solution journalism part of it. And we're even seeing educational institutions trying to incorporate solution journalism officially into their curriculum. And that also, all of that is leading to a change in how audiences engage with these stories. A good example is one of the newsrooms we worked with in the second cohort. It's called KISS FM. I don't know why they're answering KISS FM, but that's the name. So After we trained them, we supported them to do their stories, to look into what's working, because that's really how we get them to internalize the skills. It's hands-on, so we don't just train them as a theory thing and let them move on. But after supporting them to do those stories, they did something really interesting. Usually when they open their phone lines to have phone-in conversations with the audiences, people usually call in to say, oh, these are the issues, the government is not working, these are, it's problems everywhere. But after going through the training, what they did was to say, look, guys, we know there are issues out there. We're not ignoring them. But today, on what they call Solutions Hour, for the next hour, we just want to hear about what's working around you. And people called in, really engaged with them, talked to them about the things they never considered a big deal. And that even gave them an idea of a story to follow up. Someone called in to tell them of a group of women doing amazing work in a community. And they decided to follow that story up. So that's now audiences taking ownership and also giving them story ideas to follow up on. So where all of that is leading to, we're now getting more demands, more requests from journalists to sort of tweak the trainings that we do, how we present these trainings, how they apply solution journalism to different forms of reporting they do, women issues, climate change, accountability, using solution journalism, and even to help make sure that the trainings are inclusive, because it's not just about doing trainings on Zoom. We also developed, with support from the Solution Journalism Network, a module to deliver the training via WhatsApp. So that way people who are in areas with restricted access to internet can also benefit from the training. And in expanding that, we're not just looking at the big newsrooms, just to ensure that we are touching the length and breadth of the country. We are working with small media organizations, really startup media organizations, but mostly their work is framed around talking about responses. These are some of the small media organizations that we've had the opportunity to work with, and like I said earlier, also public media organizations, and also niche platforms like Business Day in Nigeria that focuses on business reporting, but they are adopting solution journalism as an approach, and of course, educational institutions. And again, like our colleagues in Kenya, we don't just focus on English, because Nigeria is a multi-ethnic country, so we are delivering trainings. Actually, part of the fellowship, one of the fellows developed the training content in local languages. We have Igbo, we have Yoruba, we have Hausa, and Pidgin in Nigeria. So we're also delivering the trainings and doing the stories in those local languages, and of course in multiple formats. And to spread that, we came up with this idea, because like I keep saying, the growth has been really organic. So we went to a community, a state, and said, oh, we want to gather around and talk to journalists. We called it a solution journalism meetup, or social meetup for sure. We did it in one state and put it up on social media, and people were like, oh, when are you coming to our city? When are you coming to our city? And that has led to doing solution journalism meetups in different regions. Of course, if we had the capacity and resources, we want to do it across the country, but for now, we framed it to happen in different geopolitical zones. What have we learned from all of this, or what we know so far? I mean, in training, we like to show as much as possible. This is a picture of a training. When we trained our cohort 2 newsrooms, we took them on a field trip. We took them to an internally displaced persons camp. Usually when they go to such places, the first thing they have in mind is, oh, people in IDP camps have issues, we're going to uncover the problems. But because they've been trained on solution journalism, they talked about the problems, but they also went ahead to ask them, oh, what are you doing to address these problems? Are you addressing them on your own, or there are people helping you to address these issues? So it's helping to do that. And empowering journalists is really something that worked, because we're not just training them to do stories, we are telling them, look, guys, you can be the ambassadors to help spread this. So that's really been effective. And collaboration. Recently, we asked them to tell us, oh, what are the story ideas you want to work as a team? And they really told us, oh, we want to look at this issue, but from different geographical locations. So what is this person doing to solve it in this area? What is this community doing to address the same problem? So that's really some of the things we are noticing. And this is a snapshot of what we know so far, again, in numbers. 250 plus stories, over 100 of them listed in the Solution Journalism Tracker, which is really a database that collates solution journalism stories across the globe. And these stories are being written by journalists and storytellers based in Nigeria, based in Africa, They are writing about homegrown solutions and they are publishing them, usually even in international platforms.
Thank you very
the
much.
trainings are reaching more people and academic institutions. So yeah, that's the summary of what we've been doing.
Thank you very much, TBK. Sorry I had to rush you towards the end. I'm just conscious of time because we have to round up soon. And I just want to get to a couple of questions before I open it up because I'm really keen that we get your questions in as well to ask the team here. So I'll start off by asking you, Daniel, you know, in the work that you've done so far, GBK touched upon sustainability in that one of the newsrooms in Nigeria has now put a budget line item to include solutions journalism, which is a major feat. The work you've done so far, how have you thought about sustainability in that the practice of solutions journalism is initiated, but it now goes beyond the training that you've done?
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Again, my name is Daniel Otunge. Yes, sustainability is one of the key things that we have thought about to be able to sustain this, because the project that we have is grant-based, and you know all grants or projects come to an end at some point. So how do we sustain this good thing? One is working with public universities and private universities to make sure that those who are being trained as journalists actually get the training in the schools that they are in. So that's one. And secondly, we train the trainers. There are quite a number of people that we have identified, senior journalists, editors, and others that we have trained to become trainers. The lecturers in these public universities that we are also working with have also been trained, and they're becoming trainers outside the university itself. And apart from that, we're also working with media networks, the peer networks, the associations of journalists in Uganda, in Kenya, and in Rwanda, and also in Nigeria as well, and other countries. Whereby the members of these journalism associations come from very many other media houses that they work for. So by engaging these associations and conducting trainings under them, we are able to reach other media houses that actually are not part and parcel of the newsroom project that we are talking about right now.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Daniel. Question for you, Chibike. Obviously, the work that we do across both organizations, you're presenting solutions, but not just presenting them for the sake of it, also to empower people, but also to try to change the way policymakers see problems. Can you think of any examples, or can you share any examples of how you've seen the solution stories influence or change policies and practices in Nigeria?
Yes, a quick example comes to mind, a radio station in southern Nigeria that we trained, and they did a story on how a community is addressing issues around open defecation. So after they did the story and the story went out, another community leader heard the story and sort of started thinking. And the thing is, like someone said recently, most times when we think about policymakers, it's not really the big, like the ministers and, you know, the people in suits and, you know, ties and all. They're not just the policymakers. Those community leaders, they also have influence over the community. So this leader heard this story and started thinking, oh, this is possible in this community. What can I do to sort of replicate what they did, or what can I learn from them? So what he did was, you know, sort of put a law, because they also have their own bylaws and they come together as a committee to put these laws up. So he said, they are going to stop open defecation. So that sort of started changing how the communities address open defecation in the community.
I think that's a really great example when you look beyond policymakers as people in suits or smart pantsuits for women or otherwise. But policymakers are people who have the ability to influence decisions. We don't often think of them as policymakers. So that's a great example of how that has influenced policies in that community. And those people are trusted. So that's a really great example of how, you know, we look at policy in a different way. Sharon, you shared a lot about the work that you've done across 3 countries in East Africa. What for you, after these cohorts that you've trained, have been, let's just say, what are the 3 key takeouts you've had in instituting the practice of sojo in the newsrooms?
So for my 3 key things that I've learned is that journalists are willing to learn. We have established journalists who are looking forward to learning what is this sojourn really about. And we are seeing diverse interest from people of different calibers, managers in newsrooms, editors in newsrooms, journalists themselves willing to learn about sojourn. Additionally, we are also seeing them, we are seeing that even the audience is changing. The African audience from where we are seated wants more of positive news. It's not always about bad news, bad news. So the more they hear about these solutions that are being implemented from the community level, they want more. They want more. So people are hungry for solution stories, and it's our work to just throw it out there like as journalists. So my takeout is that people are hungry for solutions. People are willing to do solution stories, especially journalists, only if they can get the right resources to fund them to do solution stories. Because solution stories are also very, they are very resource consuming. So sometimes they require a lot of resources. So as much as journalists are hungry, if they get to do the stories, if they get the right resources, why not? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one final question to you, Chibike. I'm keen to open it up. Very quickly, can you share an experience, or can you share experiences of how you have seen journalists, for instance, in the global north, train journalists in the way they report news from Africa?
Interesting. So, yeah, I think I've seen a shift in that because of the visibility and, again, this organic growth of newsrooms and journalists in Nigeria taking ownership of talking about or telling stories of responses in their communities. So that's sort of building trust and the interest in reporting about what's working on the continent and not just amplifying the issues. And again, that trust is also leading to bringing on board those people who are leading the efforts, like Science Africa, like Nigeria Health Watch, to support the training. A good example is the European Journalism Center. I think one of their grants, sometime in 2021, where they had people to do stories around different global health issues and report them from a solutions perspective from the global south. So they reached out to us and we're part of that training. Usually you wouldn't have that opportunity. They would do the training for those people and they would just go into the field to do their reports. But they reached out to Nigeria Health Watch and we co-facilitated that training with the EJC, for those grantees that they selected. So that's really how I see that also changing trainings.
Thank you. Thank you very much, guys. Quickly, you want to open it up? You want to go?
Yes, thank you. Just to add very quickly that... Just to add quickly that from what we have seen, we've been able to distill about 9 key issues that we've learned out of this solutions journalism, and I can quickly state them. One is that solutions journalism is promoting more of who is doing what where and with what effect, rather than who is saying what where and with what effect. And the doing is more important to reporting from this perspective. Then it brings about changes in behavior because it goes beyond awareness, talking about what is happening and what can people do about it, and that brings about behavior change and therefore people can take action. Then the third thing is that sojo leads to positive action. Rather than people getting angry at problems, shouting fire, fire, fire with no solutions, the difference is that it offers people something. Then it creates hope, that's what you had, and confidence that these problems of health, of whatever, people can be able to deal with them. For example, during the COVID situation in Africa, in Uganda, to be specific, very quickly, in Uganda, the ARV access was a problem due to lockdown. And because of solutions journalism, that was solved by the government changing policy, regulations to allow certain NGOs to become essential service providers so that they could be able to go and give people the ARVs in their homes. So that was really very important. Then the other key thing is that it creates trust, like it was said, between sources and the journalists, and especially the scientists that are very skeptical about journalists, and also the policymakers that always think we are a threat to their positions. And then the seventh thing is that it completes the story. SOJO completes the story because we always say we are a reflection of society. How do you reflect society if you don't say what people are doing about the problems that they face? So in this case, when you add the response that people have on their own, you are completing the story. So to us, it's a very important approach. Then the SOJO also still remains rigorous as it focuses on those. So we don't lose the focus on journalism being a rigorous practice, so that you also keep government in check, authority in check. That is what we emphasize. And lastly, we are also seeing the international networks like CNN, BBC, DW, Al Jazeera, they are also focusing more and more on SOJO, especially when it comes to reporting on key issues in Africa like climate change, energy crisis, food insecurity, and a number of other things, and focusing on what are people doing about these things. And that is also helping to galvanize local reporters to be able also to focus on the same kind of reporting. And the good thing that our training is doing is that some of these networks also get journalists from these local newsrooms that have been trained in SOJO, and they go ahead and work in that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that additional insight. I'd like to open it up to questions very quickly. So we've got a couple of questions. So I'll start from the lady in the corner, and then there's another lady next to you, and then I'll take two from this side. Thank you. And just state who your question is directed at so that we can focus it quickly. Thank you very much.
Hi, yes. So my name's Christine Luby. I report for the United Nations, both for UN Women on Gender and then UNICEF for Water and Sanitation for a project. And I thought it was really interesting what you were talking about in terms of partnerships, some of the training that you did with the European Journalism Center. So I'd just like to expand on that. What other types of support would you potentially be interested in, whether that's sponsoring journalists? We work a lot with community networks as well to provide access to sources, experts, provide funding, additional training materials. Are there any entries to partnerships that you're particularly interested in with your network?
You can take that.
Thank you, Zamra, for that. Thank you so much for that question. I think the example that GBK gave in terms of EJC, kind of bringing us on board in terms of the training is very critical. And we'd be welcome to any type of opportunity to be part of trainings, because one thing we've always found is when people report from outside the continent, they don't have that community or local perspective. So we are very keen to support journalists wherever they are in reporting on stories both from Science Africa or with Nigeria Health Watch in being part of that training. And we often find that people are very receptive in learning from a local context, because if you're talking about a local solution, it's people on the ground who can support. So we'd be very keen to continue those discussions with you. So thank you so much for that. There was another lady next to you around there who asked a question, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Kai Nebe, also a journalist who covers issues across Africa. Very cool presentation. Just very quickly, have you ever had a situation where solutions-driven journalism has actually not worked in the way you wanted to? You've talked a lot about how it has worked and the good effects it has, but have you come across communities or certain journalists where it's not worked, and also why it hasn't worked?
And you can take that.
Yes, we have. We still have editors who are resistant to solutions journalism, and they say they do not want to go that way. So it takes a lot of engagement. We also still have journalists who are still sticking to the way they were trained in their journalism schools, the conventional approach of training, where you focus on the problems but not the solutions. I think that is somebody else's responsibility. And then we also, in solutions journalism, we also focus on stories, on responses that are not working, and then we are able to state why are they not working, and that also is a SOJO story. And when we engage further, you realize that there is also quite a lot of that have been covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Camilo? Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights. I feel very inspired. I wanted to ask Sharon and Shibike about how long did it take to train so many people? Because I feel inspired, but I'm like, wait, how much time did that take? And maybe deepening in the strategies so you could go that far.
So this has been happening since 3 years now. Project started 2020, but trainings kicked off officially in 2021. For the newsrooms, we divided them into 3 cohorts. Each cohort has 10 newsrooms, and each newsroom nominates 3 journalists to be trained. Although Science Africa took a different approach, this is for us at Nigeria Outward. But the first cohort was still shortly after COVID, so we couldn't meet in person. We did the trainings virtually, and we did it over 4 days, a day in between, so they don't get exhausted. I think 2 hours each of the days. That was how we did it. For the second cohort and third cohorts, we now did in person. So we invited them to the same venue and did the training over 2 days. So they arrived on day 1. We did the training the first day, the whole day. It's residential, so after training, morning to evening, you go back and rest. Then the next morning, we complete the training, and on the 4th day, they leave. For the second cohort, that was when we did the second day, we did the field trip, and they came back in the evening to sort of articulate their findings and present. This for the third cohort, we didn't do a field trip because there were issues around security in the city at the time. So we just gave them practical examples and tasks to do and to produce actual stories. So we gave them scenarios, and they did those stories and presented, and we gave feedback. So that was how we delivered the trainings. Thank you.
Okay, for Science Africa, what we did is that we also had 3 cohorts in the newsroom training, but in our newsroom training for the first and the second cohort, we had like one newsroom, giving us even more than 10 journalists to train. And we will train them in a period of like 3 days. And because it's online, we get to reach like more journalists at once. So we did like 3 days for one newsroom, and it was online, and it had like 10 to 15. At least 10 journalists were being trained from one newsroom. Then that was for the 2 cohorts. In the 3rd cohort, we decided to specialize. Like we only train 3 journalists per newsroom, and then 3 journalists per newsroom, but training all the 10 newsrooms at once. So this took a shorter period of time. The first 2 cohorts took like 1.5 months, because we were doing like 3 days. Yeah. But for the 3rd newsroom, it took like about 1 to 2 weeks. No, actually just 1 week, because we did 10 newsrooms at once. Additionally, we've had physical workshops. Physical workshops were like for 2 days. So 2 days in Kenya, 2 days in Uganda, 2 days in Rwanda, but then they were spread across the year. That's how we were able to train many at once. Thank you.
Just to add that what they mean by a cohort is that it takes a whole year. Every newsroom that we adopt is not just a one-off kind of parachute training. It takes 1 year, you adopt a newsroom for 1 full year, you make sure that they understand the concept very well and they're able to apply it and produce stories in Sojo.
Additionally, to just add on to what Daniel has said, what we will do is after training these newsrooms, we will also take each individual journalist through a mentorship process, whereby we are following them up, because by the time we finished this newsroom training, what we were doing is that they were submitting pitches for stories that they thought were solutions journalism after the training. So we will do like personal mentorship with each journalist. That was my work.
Thank you. Wow, we have more questions. Let me take the gentleman with the glasses.
Thank you very much, Chair.
You're welcome.
My name is Tristan Taylor, writing in South Africa's Business Day, and I want to ask about the training, particularly to Sharon, about how you dealt with the situation during the anti-government protests. As I believe it, the police were saying to the journalists, we're going to prosecute of your images, and 20 journalists, I believe, were attacked in that. And then if anybody has a comment on Martina Sogo and Cameroon, I'd be very interested in that. Thank you.
So I can talk about the anti-government protests in Kenya. So Kenya is a very funny country. People can be protesting outside here, but everything else is going on normally. It's not the images that you are seeing from people who are outside here. Actually, the protests, like for example in Nairobi, were happening in specific places. But other places, business was going on as usual. So their journalism was not really affected. Still, people are still producing stories. Everything was going on as usual. Thank you.
We can take one final question and then we need to wrap up. Okay, this gentleman over here.
I guess is particularly for Sharon, it was very interesting. I suppose when we think about who the audience is for and who we're actually doing this reporting for, especially with solutions, and when you were speaking about sort of producing in different languages and community radio, I suppose I'd be interested to know if you had any specific examples of where that sort of really benefited the community, but also in terms of how you go about sort of measuring that impact when it might not be as clear cut as. I suppose as Chibo gave the example of the open defecation and the village chief sort of being impacted too, but I wonder if you as well, Sharon, if there are sort of ways of which you try and measure how that's made an impact.
So normally Science Africa carries out an impact assessment report. And from the reports we get, these are reports from the newsrooms that we've trained and even the journalists that have gone through our training. So they give us feedback of how solutions journalism has been received either within their newsrooms or even in their community. Even as we have like several examples of how solutions journalism reporting from has had an impact even on policy. For example, there was this story that was done by Radio Rama. It's a radio station that reports in Kiswahili in the coastal part of the country. They did a story about how one constituency, the member of parliament of that constituency has come up with a training project whereby he trains youths who have not been able to get formal education, and he empowers them by giving them training on hands-on skills like technical jobs, carpentry, just these things that you can do manually with your hands, carpentry, hairdressing, such things to create employment for them. So this story that was happening in one constituency that was aired on this local radio station, it got so much audience that even now that effort is being upscaled to several counties. A county is like a state. So something that is happening within a constituency has gone viral to the extent that even states now want to implement it at the state level. So that's one example of impact. Something done at small scale, now growing to large scale. Additionally, we also have a case whereby this was a case of sand harvesting along riverbanks. This was a story that was done in Kikamba. Kikamba is one of the languages in Kenya. And the story was done by a small community radio station of how some people downstream are suffering from sand harvesting that is being carried out, but then through a solution of rehabilitating the river, people are now able to access water. And this prompted the government, the county government of that place, a county government is also like a state, to come up with policies that enable sand harvesters to do their sand harvesting, but also put up rehabilitation and reclamation measures such that people are not adversely, negatively affected by their sand harvesting activities. So there are so many stories of impact that we see from solutions reporting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Sharon. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up now because we're close to time. Join me in thanking GPK, Sharon, and Daniel for their key insights. We'd be happy to continue engaging with you after this session, probably outside, so we're still around if anybody has any further questions. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.